Over a casual lunch, they will talk about the details of every aspect of their life. But on this, the most common medical procedure in America, they will not discuss it with their friends. And why is that? It's because of the guilt that's involved. The vast majority of women will sit there and tell you, I understand it's a baby, but I've got to do this. So because they're violating their own moral code, at some point after the abortion, they're going to be experiencing guilt. She stuffs that down for a number of years until it simply won't stay down any longer and begins to experience a variety of symptoms. 43% of all American women will experience an abortion during their lifetime.
Well, that's frightening.
Despite that frightening statistic, women simply do not talk about this subject. Frederica Matthews Green, who's a wonderful pro-life writer, once said that a woman wants abortion the way an animal caught in a trap wants to gnaw off its own leg. Women don't want abortion. That's the whole purpose of the 3,500 crisis pregnancy centers, is to help women freely feel those feelings of protection and nurturance that every woman feels. Anyone who hasn't been pregnant probably will never fully grasp, and that is that when you find out or when you suspect that you're pregnant, there is something very mysterious that happens to you. It's like the universe is different today because I am pregnant. I have added a new human being to the universe, and it is such an incredible thing that you feel, and everything inside of you, call it instinct, call it God-given instinct, whatever you want to call it, but everything in a woman leaps toward nurturing and protecting and growing that little child within her. So when a woman, because of her circumstances, feels compelled to rip that child from her uterus or have it ripped from her uterus, it so goes against the maternal instinct. I have the most incredible quote that was in the Washington Post a number of years ago from a Dr. Julius Vogel. It goes something like this, and he was an abortionist, and yet he said that abortion destroys something on the deeper levels of a woman's soul.
Abortion is the most commonly performed surgery in America. 4,000 a day. This procedure is not shown on television. Why don't we see it? Is there something about what we would see that would be a little bit too hard to take or a little bit too much of a pain on our conscience? Little hands and arms and legs and feet and faces. These are little people.
In the process of dismembering and destroying these children, are they experiencing excruciating pain? In the first 8 weeks after conception, all the systems of the human body appear. But the nervous system is, in fact, the first of the bodily systems. The thalamus and the spinal column and the receptors on the skin are, in fact, all present in the early stages of the development of the unborn child. These procedures are taking the arms and taking the legs of these children and just ripping them off, tearing the bodies apart. It is only by the longest possible stretch of the imagination that one could ever conclude or imagine that this is not terribly painful. Many people have never even given this a thought.
I went to see a second trimester termination. At the time, I was not particularly pro-life. So I had been told that this baby was 20 weeks and was being aborted for Down syndrome. So I went to see the dilatation and evacuation, and I could not believe what I was seeing, that I was seeing someone take an instrument and watching the baby's organs come out of the vagina, how artificial this was, and then to actually discover that this was not a 20-weeker, that this was a 24-weeker on a 15-year-old whose mom just found out she was pregnant was even more vile to me, that I was seeing a baby being ripped from limb to limb. And that picture, that image, still sticks in my mind.
We always have heard that Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry tempts medical students and people in residency to get involved in abortion.
Actually, it is a requirement that all residents be trained in abortion. However, there is a moral clause, so if you morally object, you don't have to do them. And at my hospital at Cook County, they actually had a publicly funded abortion clinic that ran 3 days a week. The attending staff at the hospital was well compensated for doing these terminations, and the attendings were being compensated either $200 or $300 per procedure that they did, and it ran like clockwork.
One after the other.
After the other.
Another big issue that comes up is that a woman in her pregnancy, they discover there's a problem with either with her health or with the baby.
To me, there's almost no circumstance where you could not manage the mother some other way than terminating her child. It might mean that she might be in the hospital for a while, but there are almost no circumstances in which you really need to have an abortion.
And I know from the testimonies of women who've had abortions that very often, they had that abortion because they were pressured. It was a quick fix. They thought they could move on. And then when they wanted to have children, couldn't have them.
Well, first, when you have a surgical abortion, they dilate the cervix and they artificially open the cervix. And that can make it weaker for future pregnancies. And any time you take sharp instruments and put them inside the uterus, you have the potential of creating a significant amount of scar tissue within the uterus. You can cause significant damage and make it difficult for them to actually have a baby successfully in the future.
If a woman approaches abortion and thinks, wow, this is just going to erase this pregnancy and I'll be just like I was before, that's not true. And unfortunately, she finds that after the fact. What we don't realize sometimes as women is that pregnancy changes us. Whether it ends in abortion or miscarriage or childbirth, we are mothers.
There are people ready to help today with caring, confidential counseling. For alternatives to abortion, call the National Life Center, 1-800-848-LOVE. For those who are suffering the after effects of abortion, call 1-800-5-WE-CARE. On January 22nd of 1973, the United States Supreme Court issued two decisions on abortion, Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. These decisions together overturned the laws in all 50 states that were restricting or forbidding abortion and made it legal throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. Today, the plaintiffs of both of those decisions are active in the cause to get them reversed and are pro-life advocates. We're happy to have on the program today the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, Norma McCorvey from Dallas, Texas. So let's start from the beginning.
How it all began was that I found myself pregnant for the third time. I thought I couldn't bring another child into this world. A couple of weeks later, the attorney who was handling my adoption case, his name was Henry McCluskey Jr. He was friends with Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, two young graduates fresh right out of law school, and they wanted to challenge the Texas statute on abortion, so they were looking for a plaintiff. I was a hippie. I lived in a park, and I really wasn't a political person. I really didn't care about politics. But I was a hungry person too at the same time.
Right.
Sarah Weddington, Linda Coffey. I had met with them at a pizza place here in Dallas. They discussed with me women had the rights to do this and that, but why couldn't women have complete control over their reproductive organs?
You mean to say now that they were explaining this to you? It wasn't that you were saying this and therefore you went looking for them?
No, sir. They were hardcore feminists, but mostly I went for the food. I was hungry. I was a street person, and I lived out in the street. So through the course of this, they pretty much convinced me that I should be their plaintiff because I fit the complete stereotype that they needed. They needed someone who was unmarried, which I was. They needed someone who was pregnant, which I was. And they knew that I was very naive, in the political arena.
Right.
They told me that this would be a good thing for women, that this would probably put a stop to rape and incest as we knew it then.
Put a stop to rape and incest?
Yes.
How would it do that?
I have no clue. I have no clue. They wanted me to sign an affidavit that said all this stuff in it, and so I signed the affidavit, and that was on March the 7th of 1970, and that's initially what brought Roe versus Wade into being. Well, actually, after I signed the affidavit, I had very sporadic contact with the two attorneys.
What happened after that? I mean, did you ever even appear in a courtroom?
Never had to appear before any kind of judge or panel of people or anything.
Now, the reasons why you got pregnant, I think people have heard, that the claim was made that you had been the victim of a gang rape. Tell us a little bit about that.
I told this lie to Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, thinking that it might have some kind of, it might cast some kind of shadow, and nothing like that ever happened.
Tell us about the day when Roe v. Wade was actually decided. How did you come to know about it?
I found out about Roe versus Wade just like everybody else did. I read the papers. At first, I was shocked. I went into a very severe depression after that. I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't do anything but crawl inside, a vodka bottle. I would just sit and stare and think about, Roe versus Wade and Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey and all that stuff. And it enslaved me for many years. In fact, when I started paying more attention to what was going on in the pro-abortion movement, I would, get very sad. And I would start getting sad as early as November some years.
You mean as the anniversary of this rolled around?
Yes.
Each year?
Well, 1 year I even had plyboards cut to the size of my windows in my room, and I had them put up so I couldn't tell if it was day or night.
Oh, my goodness. People still did not know that you were the Jane Roe. Tell us a little bit about how and why you made that public.
Sarah Weddington wrote me a letter from some college that she was working at and said that there was a reporter here in Dallas wanting to interview me. I tuned into the station here in Dallas. I watched her for about a week, I guess, and decided that I would give her a call. We finally set up a date. She came out. It took 4 or 5 hours to get maybe a 30-second clip. She would ask me a question. I would sit there and think about it for a second. Then I would excuse myself. I would go in my bathroom, and I would take a couple of Valium, and then I would chase that with, of course, with my vodka. I was scared. And even though I was sitting right here in my own home, it was scary just to realize that 2 people outside of the 2 people that lived here knew where I lived. Well, not a lot of people saw that story that day for some reason. Sometimes I would get these strange invitations, to go to different dinners and banquets and stuff like that. And I thought, well, how can they show their face in public knowing what they're doing is wrong? I had watched the pro-lifers, here in Dallas. They would go to the cemetery out here, and they would hold services, for all the aborted babies.
Right. Now, you did go to various pro-choice rallies. To tell us a little bit about that.
I had been interviewed by Carl Rowan from USA Television in Washington, D.C. He says, well, let's talk about the rape. I said, Carl, I wasn't raped. People started picking up phones and walking out the door. They just started freaking out, kind of like.
Yes.
And Carl says, do you know that this is going to ruin you politically? And I said, well, that's okay. I've never really had that much of a political life anyway. And it hit the newsstands, and I must have heard from every pro-abort, in the world. Why had I told the truth?
Uh-huh.
See, I wasn't a feminist. A lot of these feminists, let's just take Kate Michelman, for instance. Mm-hmm. We were at the David Souter hearings, and I was sitting on this panel of all pro-abort feminist leaders. So everyone had to give their name, for the records, because we were sitting right there with the Senate Judiciary Committee. I walked outside with Gloria Allred, my attorney then.
Yes.
And I walked up to Kate Michelman, and I looked at the lapel pin that she had on. It was a little gold coat hanger. And I said, oh my, I said, what a lovely lapel pin. She said, well, in case you don't know, Norma McCourty, this is the symbol for the pro-choice movement.
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, Kate, I said, you could have hit me with a truck. I would have never guessed that. So I always had these very condescending people, in my face.
You actually worked in a facility providing abortions. Tell us about that and some of the things you saw.
The first clinic that I worked in, I was a receptionist, and sitting there the first day on the job, a woman came in to the clinic. The woman was very obviously pregnant. She was wearing maternity clothes, and I thought she had misread the signs in the hallway. I said, honey, this is where we do abortions. I said, the OB/GYN clinic is right down the hall on the other side of the hall.
Yes.
And she said that she knew that. I said, what are you doing here anyway? I said, you're wearing maternity clothes. She said, it wasn't none of my business. And I said, just out of curiosity's sake, I said, why have you come here for an abortion? She had found out that she was going to have a little girl, and she wanted to have a little boy. And the abortionist came in, and he fired me on the spot. He took her into the procedure room. It seemed like the more I thought about it, the madder I got. It was the woman. It was the look in her face that bothered me, and it made me mad to think that a woman would wait till a child in utero was completely developed and then abort it. That really bothered me. I went home and I started getting drunk. And so I started tearing posters and buttons and bumper stickers, everything that I had on my walls in my apartment, and I started throwing it out my living room, sliding door. And the more I, threw out there, the better I started feeling. By that time, the manager had came up and started knocking on my door at 11 o'clock at night, saying that I should not be littering. And she didn't blame me for being mad, because she had had an abortion. And she said that she wished she hadn't.
Norma, you worked in the abortion industry, and then one day someone moved in next door to the facility that you worked in.
Well, I simply got a phone call one Thursday morning, and I was asked if I knew who was moving into the office next to mine, and I said, I don't know, John Travolta. They said no.
So here you are working in an abortion facility, the plaintiff of Roe v. Wade, and now one of the leading national pro-life groups moves in next door. Here's one of the most active leaders. And tell us about the day that he asked forgiveness of you.
Well, it was one Saturday morning. He came over and sat down on the bench, and he started sharing with me his testimony about how he got involved with pro-life. Then he looked at me and he said, Miss Norma, and I said, yeah. He says, I want to apologize for screaming at you at your book signing, a year or so ago. And I thought, well, that takes a real man to, admit his mistakes. I started weeping as I was sitting there. And I went into my office and I started crying. And I thought, that was really nice. He started coming over and sharing scripture with me. He walks out of the door one day and he says, Miss Norma, did you know that God was pro-choice? And I'm going like, yeah, right. And he says, no, he clearly states this, Miss Norma, in Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Are you and your descendants to choose life? It just made perfectly good sense. I reiterated to him, that I had no Bible. He said that I should really get one. I told him I didn't think I would do that anytime soon. But I think the most two enchanting people that I really did meet at Key were two small children by the name of Emily and Chelsea Mackey. Mm-hmm. Emily was 7, and Chelsea was 3. And they would play in front of the mill. They're on Markville Drive, with their baby buggy and their little dolls. And she would come up to me from time to time on the sidewalk and say, Miss Norma, will you go to church with me and my family? I would always say, we'll see, Emily.
Yeah.
We'll see. I went over that same day that the volunteer was removed from the property to apologize to them for her conduct. And Emily very nonchalantly looked up at me and she says, I said, I don't want you to think that all big people are bad. I said, I apologize for that lady's action. And then Emily just kind of looks up at me and she says, well then, why are you letting them kill children inside, Miss Norma? Another stab in my heart. Uh-huh. Again, I take to my office and I cry like a small child. I sit here on my front porch for maybe 6 hours that day. I didn't move, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink anything. The only thing that kept echoing in my mind were, well then why are you letting them kill children inside, Miss Norma?
Wow.
And I talked to God. I think that was the first time that I had actually sat down. I said, I know abortion's wrong. I couldn't think of anything else to do.
Clarify for a moment with the listeners what your position is.
I do not believe in abortion in any circumstances. I've seen, I saw a fetal development chart. I studied it for a great deal of time. My conclusion was that I jumped up and told Flip and Rhonda, I said, look, it's really a baby. And they said, yeah, we know, miss.
Some children in Milwaukee were playing on a bridge, and a call came into the local police department saying that these children were throwing things off the bridge. So the local police went to investigate, And when they asked the children what they were throwing over the bridge, they said, "Little people." And they showed the police officer little containers with children in them. These children had found aborted babies in the dumpster of a nearby abortion clinic. Of all the many things that we are all concerned about that destroy and degrade human life and dignity, there's nothing that takes more human life than abortion. No crime, no disease, no natural disaster, no war, no act of terrorism, nothing is claiming more victims in our nation alone. Just by surgical abortion, some 4,000 children are killed every single day. Dr. James McMahon was an abortionist in Southern California who performed partial birth abortions, the procedure in which a child is killed in the very process of delivery. And the American Medical News asked him, "How can you do this? How do you justify tearing these children apart?" And he said, "Well, frankly, it is a child to me. And I sometimes ask myself, why couldn't this child have been adopted?" But then he said, another question comes to my mind which is more important, and that is, who owns the child? And he said, it's got to be the mother. No human being can own another. You see, because abortion is not about freedom of choice. It's about people who feel they have no freedom and no choice. They feel trapped, abandoned, desperate, afraid. Sadly, they feel there's no one to help them except the abortionist. There are other people ready to help. The good news is the help is available. And we're making progress in this because now there are more pregnancy resource centers around this country than there are abortion facilities. We are seeing young people coming and getting involved in greater numbers and with greater motivation than ever before. The reason is simple. They know it could have been them. They are aware that they are speaking up not only for the children in the womb today, they're speaking up for themselves because they realize when they were in the womb, they were considered non-persons. I could have been killed. That means that for our young people today, Roe v. Wade is a personal insult.
And I chose abortion. And from the moment that abortion was over, my life changed. I couldn't justify my own existence. I knew in my heart I'd kill my child. And yet everyone around me told me it was the best choice and then I needed to go on. And I finally found something that worked when I sold another woman an abortion in some sick, twisted way. If she was okay, I was okay. And I evolved into the abortion industry in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, first working for a man who owned 4 abortion clinics. I ran 2 of them, more than doubled his business. Well, my background was sales. And so I just took the techniques I knew I used as a salesperson and applied them to the abortion industry. And they're still widely used today. First, we kept our employees' statistics on a computer. We knew how many calls they received and how many were completed abortions. And they were compensated based on the number of abortions they booked and had completed. Using a script to overcome every single objection, for that's what sales is. You overcome the objection and you get the order. And they started with reassure. And the first question is, what's the first day of your last normal period? The young woman figures that date, gives it to the counselor, who's really a telemarketer, and she puts it on a wheel designed to calculate the birth date of the baby. But she doesn't say birth date or she doesn't say baby. She says you're 8 weeks pregnant. She has confirmed this girl's worst fear. She has planted that seed in this long marketing thread. The girl doesn't say, wait a minute, how can you tell me over the telephone that I'm pregnant? This is the pregnancy expert. She accepts it. And the next question on the form is this good news or bad news? When she replies bad news, then the counselor moves in because now she must identify the fear to use it to reaffirm the abortion decision anytime that girl or woman moves away. Whatever it is, she finds that fear. And anytime the girl says, well, maybe I could have this baby, it's, do you want to miss work? Do you want to drop out of drill team? They use the fear to sell her the abortion.
So this is not a counselor. This is a telemarketer.
It's a telemarketer who calls herself a counselor. When Planned Parenthood and other clinics say we do counseling, we go, well, it's not real counseling because they're not really offering her other choices. Think about it. They only sell one product, abortion and abortion only. You never hear them talk about adoption or continuing the pregnancy in any manner.
Tell us about your book.
We're redoing the book now and adding the section on how I sold abortions to children, because today I can talk about that. I couldn't for a long time. But break down the natural modesty, separate them from their parents, and give them birth control pills that do not work and the cheapest condoms, so of course they don't work. And of course our goal was 3 to 5 abortions from every girl between the ages of 13 and 18.
Well, here we are, 30 years after the Supreme Court decreed that taking unborn life will be constitutionally protected until the day of birth. And since then, that means there have been about 40 million abortions in America. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that about 43% of all women in America, by the time they are 45, will have had an abortion. 20% of these will be teenagers. 50% will be repeat abortions. Almost every third baby conceived and viable will be taken. It is a decisive judgment. Namely, in the womb, there is nothing worth protecting. How do you get from we do not know whether this is protectable human life to therefore we will not protect it and you may destroy it? Abortion is one of the darkest works of the human race. Sexual immorality and covetousness, and put them together and you have two of the most massive powers of American culture, and they produce abortion. 5 suggestions for how you can move on this. Consider adoption. Be a regular giver with your money to crisis pregnancy centers. Be involved in spreading truth with good literature. Make your presence known at the abortion clinics, writing, phoning, talking, visiting. 60% reported that the reason for their abortion was either economic or, quote, does not want child at this time. I do not want this baby at this time. I used to think that if I could persuade abortionists that they were killing children, they'd stop. And then I had lunch with one. Bill Long was his name. He cut me off and said, I know that better than you do. I said, well, then why do you keep doing it? And he said, it's the lesser of two evils. I said, what's the other evil? He said, a woman should have a right to do what she wants to do with what's in her body. If you take that away, that's a greater evil than the evil of killing unborn human beings, children. Roe v. Wade, 1973. Justice White and Justice Rehnquist in their dissenting opinion. The court apparently values the convenience of the pregnant mother more than the continued existence and development of the life or potential life which she carries. I can in no event join the court's judgment because I find no constitutional warrant for imposing such an order of priorities on the people and legislature of the states. Order of priorities. Got home last night and 2 emails showed up. Wesley Clark said last week, January 13, Washington Times, life begins with the mother's decision. Here's from the Sunday Telegraph, quote, I don't think infanticide is always unjustifiable. I don't think it is plausible to think that there is any moral change that occurs during the journey down the birth canal. People who think there is a difference between infanticide and late abortion have to ask the question, what has happened to the fetus in the time it takes to pass down the birth canal and into the world, which changes its moral status? I don't think anything has happened in that time. There's no morally significant difference between a 1-month-old baby outside the womb. Since we abort the babies inside the womb, it is right to abort the babies, kill the babies outside the womb. We are very near the heart of the issue with the sentence, I do not want this child at this time. That sentence is at least one of the most powerful sentences that has ever been spoken. The fetal homicide law says that if you attack a woman and also injure or kill her baby, you will be tried for 2 offenses and there will be 2 victims to the crime. Do you remember the one of the young man who assisted his girlfriend to commit suicide? She was 6 months pregnant. The law against assisted suicide is less than the law against fetal homicide, and so he was convicted of fetal homicide. The law makes it murder to kill a fetus intentionally, except in the cases of abortion. Why isn't abortion breaking the fetal homicide law? I don't want this child at this time. There is now made room for some killing to be justified solely on the basis of the will of the strong. You don't want to live in the world where the difference between your personhood and non-personhood resides not in you, but in the will of the strong. I don't want this baby. Therefore, it's not a baby. 100 years from now, abortion will be as socially and morally unthinkable as slavery is today.
I came to work one night in my capacity as a labor and delivery nurse and found out that not only was the hospital involved in late-term abortions, but that the method of abortion that the hospital used, called induced labor abortion, sometimes resulted in babies being aborted alive. And if they were aborted alive, they were allowed to die without any medical intervention whatsoever. A nursing coworker was taking a little baby boy who'd been aborted because he had Down syndrome and survived to the soiled utility room to die because his parents didn't want to hold him and she didn't have time to hold him that night. I couldn't bear the thought of this suffering child dying alone, and so I cradled and rocked him for the 45 minutes that he lived. He was between 21 and 22 weeks old, and that was a life-changing experience, and that's what made me into an activist.
Fetal murder cases, in other words, the killing of a fetus, are relatively rare, but there's one now in Sacramento. A Sacramento man allegedly attacked his pregnant girlfriend. The fetus she was carrying died, although the woman survived. We'll start talking now about the larger legal issues that this case poses. Joining us is Ruth Jones, who's a law professor. So what is the legal status of a fetus under California law?
Well, the California law defines murder as the unlawful killing of a human being or fetus. And also in the California law, it specifically accepts lawful abortion or when consented to by the mother.
Eric Scheidler joins us. He's Communications Director of the Pro-Life Action League based in Chicago. Eric, welcome to Insight.
How do you do?
Do you think fetal murder laws have any bearing in abortion? In other words, do you think they could be used against people who consent to or perform abortions?
Well, I think these laws are pretty clearly written, so as not to do that. We are particularly interested in seeing these kind of laws throughout the country because it shows that there is a real contradiction between the idea that at some times, under certain conditions, this human being growing inside of a woman is a person who can be murdered, and at other times it is simply some tissue that can be discarded. That's a contradiction, and it's not lost on the American people. The same life, which because one person wants to kill it, it's not a human being, and when another one wants to kill it, it is a human being. And that's a contradiction. And these kinds of laws, highlight that for the American people, and I think raise awareness that, there's really a problem with the very idea of legalized abortion on demand in this country.
And finally, Ruth Jones, and very quickly, I'm afraid, do you think that fetal murder laws will ultimately end up in the U.S. Supreme Court as part of a discussion or challenge of Roe v. Wade?
Yes, I definitely think, although they're not directly on point, that they will become a part of the discussion when the Supreme Court takes up abortion again.
I got involved in the abortion industry when it was very, very new in 1976. The place that I went into was very, very, very inviting. The administrator was young and very well dressed, very, very pretty. So the dressing, the window dressing was wow. I worked as a surgical nurse. I worked in the waiting room. I worked in the recovery room. I did everything that I had to do in that facility. If I was in the waiting room, I would take these girls that are waiting for their abortion, sitting in a hospital gown with their clothing in a bag, given a Valium, and I would entice them and encourage them to write a letter to their legislators to keep abortion safe and legal. Well, these kids, of course, went right ahead and did it because they just were not going to challenge me. Then I took the letters back, you see, and I was able to mail them. I would take them into the surgical suite where they would be prepared for the abortion, and then we would have the procedure. And we had a doctor who laughed and talked about his personal encounters the day before. And he was very, very, very proud of the fact that he was the fastest abortionist in the East. He loved that. And he went about his business very, very quickly.
How fast would we be talking about?
Oh, maybe a couple of minutes. I mean, he did it really quickly. You know, paying no mind to the girls. They were just an object. When they would moan because it hurt, we would ask them to please be quiet because we didn't want the other girls to hear them. And remember, we're not talking about women because that really drives me up a wall. We're talking about teenagers.
Yes.
We're talking about these young girls that would come into our facility. Their parents had no knowledge. Did these girls have knowledge of their medical history? More than likely not. These girls, when they talk about counselors, they weren't counselors. They were ordinary people who just sat there and pretended to counsel. They didn't have degrees in counseling at all. A lot of those women were troubled, you know, but they got into the feminist mindset and they just promoted everything. But they had a lot of baggage, a lot of these women. When the doctor was finished with them, I cleaned them up, prepared them, took them off the table, and had them walk to the recovery room. So immediately, you know, they were like, just go. And they would go into the recovery room. I clean up the surgical room, and then I would take the contents of the abortion, the baby, and I would take that into the lab. The lab tech would take the parts, empty it, count the parts to make sure all the parts were there. The legs, the arms, all the different parts. They had to make sure that there was nothing left inside the woman or the girl. And one of the lies that were given to these girls was that it was nothing more than a blob. They had no idea.
What impact did this have on you and on your colleagues to be seeing these body parts and having to count them and handle them?
When it was an early abortion, it didn't affect me as much as when I saw a later term abortion and we had the ribs and the bones and things like that we were counting. And then I really did not like that at all. But I was very hard-hearted. I was determined that this was a good thing. My mindset back then was terrible, absolutely terrible.
And Lorraine, how did you turn the corner? How did you break through your denial?
I started to feel very uncomfortable. I knew that this was wrong. I just could not any longer participate. I went from being a nurse to working in the corporate office. Mm-hmm. So I did a lot of different things that impacted the whole country, and I couldn't stand it. It was really destroying me. I was not resting. I was not sleeping. I knew what I was doing was wrong. The burden just kept getting heavier and heavier. I said, when we had a child that was impregnated through incest, what are we doing about this? We need to be able to report this. And the answer was always patient confidentiality. And that child would come back again and again and again. And it troubled me. And I said, this is wrong, this is wrong. These people had nothing more in their minds than earning a great deal of money. I went around the country helping to open clinics and train people. It's an industry. I wish people would understand that.
Yes.
Its purpose is to make money.
I realized I was pregnant, and I took the test with my boyfriend, and he didn't want me to have her, and he just told me all this stuff like,
I wouldn't be able to go to school, and my parents would be mad at me. I wouldn't be able to have a job. I gave in to it, and I actually believed him. And then I went to the place and got the pill, and then they told me that I had to take like 4 more. And I didn't tell my parents about it until like the day I was supposed to take the other pills.
And how long had you been in a relationship with your boyfriend?
3 years.
And did he come with you to the abortion?
No.
Okay.
So you took the RU486 drug right there at the abortion facility?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Now,
So
Ashley, when you were in the abortion clinic, how did they confirm your pregnancy?
Yeah, they did an internal ultrasound.
Okay. And did they let you see that?
No.
Or how about hear the heartbeat?
No.
Okay. Well, we do know from the documentation from their clinic that they did see heart activity. So you left the clinic and you went home, and then what happened over the next 2 days?
Well, on my way home, I was like feeling so bad. I was like, what have I done? And then I didn't tell my parents about it because my boyfriend kept on saying, everything's going to be okay. We're not supposed to have a baby at this early. I just went and told my mom about it, and she directed me to pregnancy crisis and told me not to take the pills. She said for me to call back that lady.
You mean the lady at the abortion facility?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you called the abortion facility, what did they tell you?
They basically told me to shut up and take the pills. They said that the baby would probably come out with missing a leg or a arm and wouldn't be healthy. And then I called the pregnancy crisis center, and then they directed me to Dr. Harrison, and then I came over there, and he said I could start taking progesterone shots.
So you came to our clinic, and it was the first time that you had been to our clinic. And, when you told me your story, first of all, I was just really amazed at your courage. So we came up with the idea of giving her progesterone to try to counteract and really outcompete. In other words, putting more good keys into her system to outcompete the bad keys. So that's what we did, right, Ashley?
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Right. How did you feel when you got that ultrasound and saw that heart beating?
I felt relieved that she was okay.
Ashley, how did you feel the first time you felt the baby kick?
I was happy. Because she was moving around, and when I seen the ultrasound, I seen that she had all her legs and arms and feet and hands, and I was just thinking about what that other doctor had said, that she'd be missing stuff, and she wasn't missing anything.
And how did you feel at the delivery?
Oh, I cried because I was so happy she was okay.
And what's your baby's name?
Kaylee. She'll be 3 months on the 7th of June.
Kaylee was perfectly healthy and has been perfectly healthy and is growing and doing everything she needs to do.
That is amazing. So it's an RU486 rescue. What would you say to other young women who might be faced with that exact same situation?
That they don't have to go through with it.
She had had the abortion, and now she wanted help. She sat in my office and said that no one would talk to her about the abortion, that she had lots of support with girlfriends, her boyfriend, father of the baby, and the clinic, and her parents for the abortion. And no one wanted to talk to her about it now that the abortion was done. And she had all this pain, and she didn't know what to do with it. So she came to my office week after week after week after week, and we couldn't really move through any of the healing tasks because you can't right after an abortion. It's like losing a loved one and then someone asking you to heal within a week. I just for months, literally months, just held her. That she needed someone to hold her, and she needed someone to listen to her story over and over and over again. It's very common for women to not be ready to deal with this for 5, 7, 20 years after an abortion.
Unbelievable.
I'm getting letters, emails from people who will not, flatly state they will not go and see someone face to face because their story is so horrendous. They are so filled with shame.
After 86 years of lynching, in 3 days, abortionists kill more blacks in just 3 days than 86 years of lynching. So once African Americans know this, it's an eye-opener. It's the #1 killer of blacks. There's nothing out there that even comes close to. They're talking about AIDS, and all that. Nothing comes close to what abortion has done. We're talking about something here where we only make up less than 12% of the population of the United States and count for 33% of the abortions. You just can't just stay back and think, oh my goodness, if you're a minority group, this thing is just devastating. But once the black community wake up, I mean, they wake up big time. You think on radical? Just hang out with some of the folks we hang out with now when they start getting involved. And they understand, they call it womb lynching. That's what it is. This is why right now we got a black group that's getting ready to take on the NAACP. Dr. Ewell, up in Ypsilanti, Michigan. A lot of people don't understand what Ewell has done. In 1989, Ewell led an all-black rescue, and that was in East Lansing, Michigan. Him and his church did a sit-in, and when blacks do a sit-in, they not only went in, they chained themselves inside the abortion clinic. Why it didn't make news? Because the media did not want people to know that blacks were against this thing called abortion. Blacks are not sitting still while their babies are being put to death. We're beginning to take a stand. We're calling out against it. Regardless of what they're saying statistical, it's worse than what it looks like. When people start talking about, wow, well, 3 out of every 5 black child is being aborted. It's what are you doing about the key issues of this moment? When they abort these babies, they go in there, rip that little baby's leg off and put it on the table. They rip the other baby's leg off, put it on there. They rip that baby's arms and off, and they take those babies apart and lay it down just to make sure they pulled everything out of that woman. That little body lying at the abortion table naked. These are little children that are dying, that will never know what it is to be hungry, to be fed. These are little children that are dying, and they never even know what it is to be sick and to get well.
We did something called the Say So March. And we're based on a theme called If You Love the Children, Say So. But we decided we were going to march from Newark, New Jersey to Washington, D.C. And when we got to Washington, D.C., we were going to lay 1,452 roses down the steps of the Supreme Court, because that represented the number of black children aborted each day in America. It's genocide. We said, if you love the children, say so. Planned Parenthood went into hiding during the march. The one time they did come out against us, they said, it's not 1,452, while it's only 1,130 something. And that sounded so horrible, you know, to people. They stopped responding to news interviews and requests.
Even though we knew scientifically what life was, the definition of it, a baby growing in its mother's womb is indeed life, we chose to go along with a devil's point of view that this was something we as physicians, even though from a secular sense physicians are called by the Hippocratic Oath to not do abortions and to protect life. But
I always remember where I came from, and I can't stress the importance of praying for current abortion providers.
I'd like to speak to a special group, and I guess that's our fellow colleagues, and that is to tell them that it has been this great public betrayal of trust that we as physicians, the protectors of human life, have done. And I just want to call out to them to say, come back to our roots, come back to what our calling is, to be protectors of life.
You do not have to do what you're doing. Come out. We will help you through the process of getting out of this dirty, ugly, unsatisfying, troubling, bloody work, and we will help you find peace again, and we will help you find a way to use your skills to protect and to serve life rather than to destroy it. We're talking about anyone who assists in any way with this procedure, even those who guard the facilities or clean up the floors or secretaries. We will help you through the process of getting out of this work, and we will help you find peace again, and we will help you find a way to use your skills, use your talents, and use your energies to protect and to serve life rather than to destroy it. I'm sure that many of the listeners aren't even aware that abortions are legally taking place in this country in the 7th, 8th, and 9th month of pregnancy. What were the latest abortions you saw or participated in the facility where you worked? How late into the pregnancy?
I'm talking about the 9th month.
The 9th month?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And how did you ever end up working in an abortion facility?
You know, about 10 years before I went to work in this abortion clinic, I was prepared to want to deny the evil of abortion because I had committed it.
Sure.
You know, I realized I was 21 years old when I had my abortion, so I thought I was pro-choice, and I thought it would be really interesting to go into this clinic and work for, a noble cause. On the first day, I saw a waiting room full of pregnant women, and for the first 6 weeks, I mostly worked on updating his computer records and his files, so I handled all the medical records, the entire time I was there. But after 6 weeks, not only was I starting to get a good idea of what was going on from the medical records, I started answering the phone. And they trained, anybody who answered the phone had to be trained in high-pressure sales techniques. I was adding these things up, these lies and deceptions, the stories of the women who I met. This was all adding up in my heart. They gave me some cassette tapes to listen to for training that told how you should use words to establish a rapport with a woman and get them to think that you are their friend.
Okay.
And he said, do everything you can to at least get them to come in, because if they will come in, then I know I can finish selling them the abortion.
Now, other people who used to work in abortion facilities would say that two of the most frequent questions that the women would ask are, number one, is it a baby? And number two, does the procedure hurt?
Well, we didn't get the "Are you a baby?" question because these were 7, 8, and 9 months along. They had no question in their mind, but everybody wants to know if it hurts. There was a room in the basement that he used for the delivery room, and he would line the girls down there in cots, and they would deliver their babies down there. And one day he came up out of the basement with a big box in his arms, and then he walked down a little short hallway just around the corner from me. And he was trying to open a door down there, and I knew what was in that room because the administrator, I said, what's in that room? It's locked up. And she said, well, that's the crematorium oven. And she said, it's a full-size oven, just like they use in funeral homes. So he hollered out for me to come and help him. So I went and turned the key in the lock and opened the door, and I'm probably one of the few people who's ever seen that oven.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and sat down at my computer, and I realized that what he was carrying was a cardboard box, large, heavy box full of dead children. And I was just frozen. I was just horrified. And I could hear him fire the oven up, and it smelled terrible.
You could smell the babies burning.
Oh, yeah, it was heartbreaking.
You saw that, you smelled that, and then you decided you have to get out. Just to clarify one thing, you mentioned that the women were downstairs, and that's where they delivered their babies. You used the term delivered.
Right. You've got a 7, 8, 9 month baby who probably weighs at least 4 pounds. It's a 3-day procedure, and as in some of the second trimester procedures, they use a laminaria to dilate the cervix. They give the mother drugs to help induce labor. And then on the 3rd day, they go down in the basement and line up and deliver the children just like you would, in a hospital delivery room. Well, the baby is supposed to die on the 1st day. The doctor inserts a long needle into the baby's heart and injects some kind of toxin. At that time, we were using digitalis or digoxin.
Yes.
But the idea is to stimulate the body's natural miscarriage response. But that doesn't always happen the way it's supposed to.
So, in other words, sometimes babies are delivered live.
Yes, sometimes babies are delivered live, but I don't think they ever get out of that basement alive.
I see. When you knew you had to leave the abortion industry, you just weren't sure who to turn to yet, and you said you didn't know, and at that point didn't trust the pro-life groups and the pro-life movement. You didn't know how they would respond to you. We in the pro-life movement want nothing more than to reach out with compassionate love and with welcome to anyone who right now is working in the abortion industry and feels the way that Laura felt that day when she said, I've got to get out of here. There is a place for you to turn, and there are people who, like Laura, have been there and are ready to help you to come out of that industry.
The essential pro-life argument has 3 premises. If all 3 premises are true, then the pro-life conclusion logically follows that the life of each individual member of a species, at least of mammal, begins at conception. That's a truism that was taught in all the biology textbooks in America that were written before Roe v. Wade in 1972. And I haven't been able to find any biology textbook, except those written by Christians for Christian schools, that repeated that after 1972. Yet the new textbooks did not appeal to a single new scientific discovery to justify their change. It was purely political. Textbooks wanted to avoid political controversy. So the first premise of the pro-life argument is that all humans are human. Second premise is that all humans have the right to life because they're all human persons. And that makes us all essentially equal. There's an equality in essence among all of us. Therefore, the golden rule, or the rule of justice, says, since you don't want others to kill you against your will, you ought not to kill them against their will. The third premise is the legal premise. It's about the function of the law. It says the law must protect the most basic human rights of all citizens. Well, if all humans are human, and if all humans have a right to life, and if the law must protect human rights, then the law must protect the right of all humans to life. Shortly after Roe v. Wade, most pro-choicers denied the first premise. They said either in a popular way that the thing you abort is only a potential person or only a potential human being. People who didn't know much about science read such arguments and said, well, yeah, that's not a human being, so what's the big deal about abortion? So their consciences were genuinely not troubled by it. I think that's due to scientific ignorance. And I think it's very obvious and very clear from a scientific point of view, certainly from a genetic point of view, that little thing there is a very little human. What it's doing is something that only a human being can do. It's growing a human brain and nervous system. What fascinates me and frankly upsets me is that most philosophers now admit the truth of the first premise. And most pro-choice arguments now question the second premise rather than the first. Scientific ignorance is a weakness of intellect, which may be excusable. But moral ignorance on a matter this basic is much less excusable. I was at a philosophy convention some years ago. There was an argument about euthanasia. It was very similar to the abortion argument. Is it okay to kill people when they're in pain, even without their consent? What about advanced Alzheimer's patients? And the person who was giving the paper was justifying killing Alzheimer's patients, even without their consent. She said, we don't treat any other species of animal in this special human way. We divide all mice into 3 categories depending on how we feel about them. If we have a pet mouse, we feel in a semi-human way towards the mouse, and we would feel guilty about killing it. If it's a laboratory mouse, we don't have any feelings towards it at all. It's simply an object. And finally, mice in the wilderness, we have no feelings towards. And then she said, I see absolutely no logical reason why we should not treat our own species in exactly the same way as we treat every other species. So let us divide all human beings into laboratory animals, which it's right to kill for good reasons, like maybe before you kill them, you can harvest their organs. Nobody in the audience, except 2 people, reacted to that in any other way than just nodding and shaking their heads. If that's a socially acceptable attitude, I think we're in deep doo-doo, whether this is about abortion or genocide or anything else. Third, the legal premise. I'm personally against abortion, but I wouldn't want to impose my will on others. Abortion is an ugly reality, but I want to ask those people, why is abortion ugly? Why are you personally against abortion? Just because there's blood there? Are you also against all surgery? If the reason you're against abortion is that you think it kills an innocent human being, how can you say you don't want to impose your will on others? What about slavery? I'm personally against slavery, but if you want to keep slaves, that's okay. I'm personally against rape, but I wouldn't want to see laws against it. Let's look at the essential argument that Roe v. Wade developed. We don't know if the fetus has a human right to life because we don't know if it's human. If we don't know when human life begins, then we shouldn't outlaw abortion. That seems to me to be a very strange argument because both premises are false. We do know when human life begins. At least everybody did before 1972. And it's simply a scientific fact. Secondly, the principle that if we don't know when human life begins, we shouldn't outlaw abortion is a very strange principle. That's equivalent to saying, if I don't know whether you're a human being or not, it's okay for me to kill that thing that might be a human being, but it might not. Suppose somebody came into this room and I thought that it was probably an animal dressed in a human Halloween costume because it had a very, very ugly face. And so if I don't like it and it's inconvenient to me, is it okay for me to kill it? Well, of course not, because it might be a human being. You don't know. The fact that you don't know means don't shoot. The bush is moving. It might be a deer. It might be my fellow hunter. What do I do? Shoot. Yeah, right. Or you're driving home at night and you see something in the street. It's an overcoat. It's an old, dirty overcoat, and it seems to be moving. It's a windy night, so maybe it's just wind moving the overcoat, but it seems to be crawling across the road. Let's say you're going down the highway at 50 miles an hour, and the thing suddenly appears in your headlights, and the only way you can avoid running over it is by swerving and maybe turn over and at least damage the car. Well, if there's some good reason to think that is probably a human being, don't drive over it. anyone who did drive over that or kill the thing in the Halloween costume could not plead ignorance. That's at least criminal negligence. So it's very strange that the court used the skeptical argument for abortion. I think the skeptical argument counts against abortion. You either know what a fetus is or you don't. You're either skeptical, you say, I don't know whether it's human or not, or you don't know. Well, if the fetus is a person with rights, including a right to life, and you know that, and you nevertheless deliberately choose to kill it, that's the definition of murder. And if it's premeditated, that's first-degree murder. Suppose you don't know that a fetus is a person, but in fact it is. You don't know what it is. You shoot it anyway. You shoot the leaf moving in the tree, and it happens to be your fellow hunter. Oh, I didn't mean to kill him. You have killed a man. That's manslaughter. Not first-degree murder, but you have killed a man, and you are responsible for that. That's a very serious crime. Well, suppose the fetus is not a person. But you don't know that. Even so, that's criminal negligence. You're just lucky. It happened to be a deer, but you didn't know that. It happened that was a cleverly disguised robot and not a human being that you killed walking into the room, but you didn't know that. The usual move that the pro-choice philosopher makes at this point is to say, yeah, it's a human being, but it doesn't have rights. Well, then we have two very simply and clearly different philosophies of rights. Either all humans have rights or some humans have rights. If only some humans have rights, then some don't. The history of that second philosophy is rather dark. It includes Dred Scott, which said blacks are not fully human because they're property. Nobody wants to say that except to justify slavery. Or when the Nazis began their eugenics program, it was based on this famous book by the German doctors called Life Unworthy of Life. Look at these severely retarded people. Look at these imbeciles. Look at these mental idiots. How could you say that they have a right to life? It would only be compassionate to kill them. One of the most famous American jurists in history, Oliver Wendell Holmes, bought into some of that philosophy when he justified the Virginia compulsory sterilization law by using language that looked like it was copied from that book. And Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, has also not only personally friendly with the Nazis at the time, but said things very similar to that, including racist things like more babies from the fit and fewer for the unfit. Only when you want to do something bad to some human beings do you relabel them. Many philosophers that are pro-choice argue, yes, they're human beings, but they're not persons. Only some human beings are persons. Those that are fully functional, those that are adult, those that are rational, those that can interact with others, those that can contribute to society, those that you can recognize, those that are wanted, whatever the standard. A line is drawn between those human beings that do have a right to life and those human beings that do not have a right to life. And that line is always drawn by a human being who is alive and therefore powerful and has the power of life and death over this other human being who can be killed. So either all humans are persons or some humans are persons. I believe that all humans are persons. Is a human being simply what society says it is or what you want to say it is? Is it your will and your power that defines a human being, or is it nature that defines a human being? Let's say you're living in a rather primitive place. A baby is dropped at your door. There's no chance to go to the hospital and give it a doctor's help. You're doing some important research work, let's say, and you really shouldn't leave it. But if you leave the baby, it's going to freeze to death. It's the middle of winter. What do? Do you take the baby in for a week and sacrifice your good for the baby? Of course you do. It's life versus research. But I think anybody would blame somebody for saying, I was writing a book and I needed time to myself, so I let the baby freeze to death. That is the snobbery of the socialist. It takes a village to raise a child. No, it doesn't. It takes a mother and hopefully a father. But we can't expect this of the poor. Why? Because they're poor? As a matter of fact, there's a definite correlation also between riches and abortion. The richer you are, the more pro-choice you are. And I think there's a hidden racism here, too. It's hidden. It's not popular anymore. But, we don't want too many of those people. Look, they're reproducing like flies. Hispanics, blacks, we're the superior. There's the atheist philosophy of life, the secularist philosophy of life, and you see that in Scandinavia and Iceland and the Netherlands and Belgium and Germany and England. And then there's the rest of the world, which is religious. Which way will America go? I hope we go south rather than north, because South's values, if I can use geographical terms here, are faith and hope and love and community and family, and North's values are money, sex, and power and science and technology. So, which are more important? No contest. The statistics are wildly overblown, but yes, there will be unsafe, dirty, back alley abortions. Right. just as there are now dirty, unsafe back alley assassinations. So should we make assassination clear and clean and safe? Anybody who wants to assassinate somebody else, let's bring him to this safe area, Red Square, where there's free speech and free assassination. Shall we use litigation, and should we use the ballot box, or should we use philosophy and education, or should we use personal testimony? All of it, for goodness sakes.
The problem came when most of my patients were coming back to me after having had an abortion, and instead of pursuing their wants and their dreams and their desires, they were getting pregnant again. And each time they came back, their self-worth, their self-esteem was lower. Recognizing the humanity of the unborn child was, for the longest time, I was able to deny that. But we did do an ultrasound on a woman who was 17 weeks pregnant, and during the abortion procedure, and I watched the battle take place and saw the baby fight the cannula, which is the plastic end of the suction tube. And so I realized then that this baby knew what was going on, in that he knew he was fighting for his life. So it was a series of events which took place, becoming disillusioned with the National Organization for Women, which I had belonged for years. After 5 years and 10,000 dead babies, I came to the realization that this was not the panacea, this was not the answer for women.
Whether it's handicapped children or whether it's preborn children or old people, the criteria for who lives or dies is wantedness. And I ask you, is that civilization? I think not.
The phenomenon of children killing children, students shooting students in the schools.
But it's certainly, this lack of respect for your own life. I'm only alive because I had a relative value. Somebody wanted me, and wantedness is a relative thing. I had no intrinsic value. And because I had no intrinsic value, other people don't have intrinsic value. And if I don't want them, then they're worthy of death, like my siblings, who were not wanted, and they had to die, so other people could die.
Arthur Koestler wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine, quote, on disbelieving atrocities, in which he took public opinion in the democracies to task for shutting out the reality of the evils being perpetrated in Nazi-occupied Europe. Koestler described himself as belonging to a group of, quote, escaped victims or eyewitnesses who, haunted by our memories, go on screaming on the wireless, yelling at you in newspapers and in public meetings, theaters, and cinemas. Now and then we succeed in reaching your ear for a moment. I know it each time it happens, by a certain dumb wonder on your faces, but it only lasts a minute. You shake yourselves like puppies who got their fur wet. Then the transparent screen descends again, protected by the dream barrier, which stifles all sound. We, the screamers, have been at it now for about 10 years. You thought we were maniacs. At present we have the mania of trying to tell you about the killing, by hot steam, mass electrocution, and live burial of the total Jewish population of Europe. So far, 3 million have died. It is the greatest mass killing in recorded history, and it goes on daily, hourly, as regularly as the ticking of your watch. I have photographs before me on the desk while I am writing this, and that accounts for my emotion and bitterness. People died to smuggle them out of Poland. They thought it was worthwhile. The facts have been published in pamphlets, white books, newspapers, magazines, and whatnot. But the other day, I met one of the best-known American journalists over here. He told me that in the course of some recent public opinion survey, 9 out of 10 average American citizens, when asked whether they believed that the Nazis commit atrocities, answered that it was all propaganda lies, and that they don't believe a word of it. As to this country, I have been lecturing now for 3 years to the troops, and their attitude is the same. They don't believe in concentration camps. They don't believe in the starved children of Greece, in the shot hostages in France, in the mass graves of Poland. You can convince them for an hour. Then they shake themselves. Their mental self-defense begins to work, and in a week, the shrug of incredulity has returned like a reflex, temporarily weakened by a shock. Clearly, all this is becoming a mania with me and my like. Clearly, we must suffer from some morbid obsession, whereas the others are healthy and normal. But the characteristic symptom of maniacs is that they lose contact with reality and live in a fantasy world. So perhaps it is the other way around. Perhaps it is we, the screamers, who react in a sound and healthy way to the reality which surrounds us, whereas you are the neurotics who totter about in a screened fantasy world because you lack the faculty to face the facts. Were it not so, this war would have been avoided, and those murdered within sight of your daydreaming eyes would still be alive. So ends the quote of Arthur Koestler, writing in bitterness because people were denying the reality of the atrocities that he knew about full well. I say the same as this gentleman. I say the same because he said, I have photographs here of the atrocities I'm speaking about as I write to you. My dear friends, that I too have photographs of the atrocities that I am speaking to you about. Human children being destroyed legally. The fact that it is legal does not make it right. What the Nazis did was legal as well. We only solve problems in our society when we face up to those problems. So I am asking you today, learn more about what an abortion actually is. Let's not give way to denial. You know, ignorance is one thing. It means I don't know. But denial means I don't want to know.